Hi everyone, today we're going to start graphing trig functions and we're only going to graph the sine and the cosine because I think it's hard enough to graph these being out of the classroom or in the classroom, let alone if we are doing it remotely. I personally think though this is one of the easier graphings that we'll do once you get the concept. So today we're going to graph Monday. Tomorrow, which is Tuesday, we don't meet. Wednesday, we're going to graph again. Thursday, you will work on your review. Friday is a flex day. And Monday, the 11th, will be your quiz on graphing and Pythagorean identities. Then you'll have a unit review, and then your trig unit test will be on Thursday, May 14th. So to start off this graphing, first we're going to look at theta and then the sine of theta. So the first table, top left, if theta is equal to 0, then the sine of theta is equal to 0. So if x is theta and y is the sine of theta, if x is 0, then, or if theta is 0, then the sine is 0. If theta is pi over 2, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. If theta is pi, then the sine of pi is 0. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1, and the sine of 2 pi is 0. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can think about your unit circle. Pi over 2 is here, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, or 0. And then we're looking at the sine, the y values of all of these. So the y value here is 1, the y value here is 0, the y value here is -1, and the y value here is 0. We can take those ordered pairs and plot them on the coordinate plane if we have the x-axis be theta, which is pi over 2, pi 3, pi over 2, and so forth, and y be 1, 0, and -1. So the first point, if theta is 0 and y is 0, then we can plot a point here. If theta is pi over 2 and y is 1, that point is here. Pi is 0, 3 pi over 2 is -1, 2 pi is 0. What we just graphed there is what's called a sine wave. That is one period of a sine wave. Because once I keep going on, if I do 0 again, go back to the beginning, I do 0. So I do 0, 0. And then, I'm sorry, not 0, 0. After 2 pi, then I can go to 5 pi over 2 and so forth. So I can keep going around that unit circle, and it's going to keep cycling through 0, 1, 0, -1, 0, 1, 0, -1, and so forth. So we're just going to keep oscillating up and down. This is a sine wave. It's going to go up, down, and then keep going like that. And we'll see that below. But for right here, that's just one period of it, or one cycle of that sine wave. The cosine is a little bit different. Now we're going to be looking at the x value of these points. So if theta is 0, the x value is 0. If theta is pi over 2, if theta is 0, the x value is 1. If theta is pi over 2, the x value is 0. If theta is pi, the x value is -1. 3 pi over 2, the x value is 0, and then we're going to come back to 1. So we can plot those points. First, we start 0, 1, and then pi over 2, 0. Pi, -1, 3 pi over 2, 0, and 2 pi is 1. So we can make what's called one cycle of the cosine wave. And again, it's going to go to 0, 1, 0, -1, 0, 1, 0, -1. So this is one cycle, or what's called one period of a cosine wave. Down below, the amplitude of these graphs is the height of the graph. I got new pen tools for some reason. This is like a Twilight one. The height, which is, we call it the absolute value of A. So just like the horizontal shrink and stretch, we don't look at the sine of it. We aren't going to look at the sine of A. The height of if A is -2 or if A is 2, it's the same thing. The period is the horizontal length of one cycle. And we can also call that 2 pi over b. This pen is funny. So the horizontal length of one cycle is 2 pi over b, we call it. And I'm going to tell you what b is in just a minute. So looking at this first graph, this is y is equal to sine of x. It's going to start at 0, 0, come up to 1, go back to 0, come down to -1, and go up. That is one period or one cycle of the sine wave. The cosine starts at +1, goes down, and goes up. So see the different shape of both of the graphs. When you get to pre-calc, these are going to be there's going to be horizontal shifts and phase shifts and all these different things that we graph. But for us, for Algebra 2, for an introduction of it, the sine graph is going to start at 0, 0 and go up. And then the cosine graph is going to start at 0, 1 and come down. And that's going to be one cycle or one period. So you can see here that it says period is, oops, that's supposed to be yellow. The period is 2 pi. And the period is 2 pi. So this one full cycle will cycle through, the period is 2 pi. And that does change. And you can see here that the cosine function f of x is a times the cosine of bx. This sine function is f of x is a times the sine of bx. So again, just making sure the sine starts at 0, 0, the cosine starts at 0, 1. So what we're going to do is determine what type of graph this is, a sine or a cosine. We're going to find the amplitude, and then we're going to write a function for the graph. So first we have to see if it starts at 0, 0 or 0, quote, 1. So if it starts at 0, 0, it's going to be a sine wave. It's going to go up, down, and back up for one full cycle or one full period. So we know that this is definitely a sine graph. The amplitude is how high that graph goes. So I see here that the amplitude is 3. So my amplitude is going to be 3 up here. Then we're going to figure out what is going to go in this parentheses, what we're doing the sine of. That in there is b times x. So if the period here is 4 pi, because that takes 4 pi to get one full cycle, and we also know from up here that the period is 2 pi over b, then 2 pi over b is going to be equal to 4 pi. And then we can solve for b. So we can multiply both sides by b, so we get 2 pi is equal to 4 pi b. We can divide both sides by 4 pi and get b is equal to 1/2. So to get the value of b, we set the period equal to 2 pi over b. So then the next one, I know this is a cosine because it starts up and goes down and goes up. To me, the cosine graph looks kind of like a C. And to me, the sine graph looks kind of like an S, sideways and flipped around. So to me, cosine looks like a C, sine looks like an S. That's how I remember them. So then again, we know that this is a cosine graph, so y equals. The amplitude is the height, so it looks like the height is 5. And it's the cosine graph, and we're going to figure out what b is because that's going to be the coefficient of x. Again, the period is pi over 2. It's however long it takes for one full cycle. So 2 pi over b is equal to pi over 2. And again, we can solve it the same way, multiply both sides by b. So 2 pi is equal to pi over 2 times b. And to get rid of this fraction here, we can multiply by 2 over pi. And then I can get 4 is equal to b. So we get 4x inside the parentheses. So to find b, we set the period equal to 2 pi over b, and then we solve for b. The amplitude is the height. The cosine makes what looks like a C. The sine makes what looks like an S. And again, when you get to pre-calc, there's going to be a little bit harder graphing.